Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Illuminate, Navigate, Radiate, Journey of Emotional Resilience. Coming to you with our first topic discussion of April. Got Michael with us today. How you doing, Michael?
Doing great as always. Always fun to be here.
Oh yeah, man. And getting started on this month is going to be a lot of fun. You know, we have some great journey segments coming out. Really looking forward to our series starting on Friday. That'll be a lot of fun to go into those discussions. And then this one starting off with courage and vulnerability. You know, so talking about those different experiences that we have in life and what that can do when you open up and you share. And what it does when you hear somebody else, right? What it does when you hear somebody else going through those same things, and you can kind of realize you're not alone. I know, like, going through addiction, and even when I get really depressed or anxious, even today, like, I start convincing myself that I'm alone in what I'm doing. And it's been cool doing the journey segments, you know, and then talking to you. I'm constantly having these conversations where I realize I'm not alone. And that does a lot for me mentally, just to realize, like, I'm not as crazy as I feel sometimes. Like, other people are struggling, people that, you know, are in different aspects of life, different people, different experiences. And I think that's a really cool thing to understand when we start to open up and we start to share our experiences about life, and we start to listen to other people's experience about in life, and take that in and apply it in our own. I think we can have a lot of growth, but also it does a lot of good for me mentally as well, putting me in a good place and kind of raising my spirits at times.
Yeah, I like what you said there. I know that sharing my experiences, whether it's something that I did or didn't do, has actually been tough for me until recently. I don't really open up to people that I don't know. So if not my close circle, I may say nothing to you, and you might have done the worst thing possible to me, and I just don't know how to express it, or I wouldn't really be comfortable getting into that vulnerable stage of sharing anything. So for me, it's kind of the opposite, where I just don't say anything to anybody and never would say anything to anybody, and no one would know if I'm okay or if I'm not doing well, or drop off of the face of the earth for 4 or 5 days at a time and have people kind of wondering if I'm cool, am I alive, you breathing? And it wasn't even that I was on hard drugs or anything like that. I just kind of didn't like being vulnerable, so I never really had that courage to share it with people. So that's kind of where my journey started back in my, I'll say, early 20s, where, yeah, everything seemed fine at first. And you might not know that I'm either going through anything or that I had a problem with anybody, but I might have had a deep problem and just would never talk about it and have a reason to share it, because I felt like I didn't want to be looked at in a different light or have people think of me in a different way than what I kind of was already portraying. And so that's kind of where I started to struggle with that type of self-realization, because I was never good at it, never wanted to, and just kind of hated the idea of having to share stuff to other people.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. I think of a lot of us, like, can at least start off looking at it that way, or even struggle with it as we keep going, right? Is that idea of, oh, if I share this, if I say this, I'm going to get one or two reactions, right? At least that's, especially like dealing with drugs and different things like that. I've gotten those different reactions about when I open up and share it. But you know, just after getting clean and having some moments where I'm just really depressed, and so I seclude myself, and you know, maybe I stop talking to people, or you know, maybe I miss a couple practices, or maybe I miss work for a day or two, and it's like I don't even fully let them in on what's going on, because I'm like, well, I don't want to say this, I don't want to like appear weak, or I don't want to look weak, or I don't want to, like, I don't want people to think like I'm, you know, I don't know, less than, or whatever it is I'm convincing myself that they're going to think of me. um and I think that's a struggle. That's a real struggle, right? Like, to be vulnerable is probably one of the hardest things to do, but I also think it offers some of the most growth, because you realize when you're, or at least I've realized when I've been vulnerable in moments, the way some people react is just amazing. When I can say, hey, look, you know, I'm really struggling right now with this, or like, I'm just mentally, I'm not feeling good. I'm depressed. I can't get out of bed right now. I can't get over to what I was supposed to be doing. And then some people are just like, yo, I get it. Like, I completely understand. I've been there in those moments. Just keep me updated. You know, let me know what's going on. If you need to talk, talk. I'm here for you. And so when you have those people and you have those reactions, it does a really good job of encouraging us to keep doing it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I feel like my experiences have been, unfortunately, the opposite, because I had, I shared something kind of maybe early on, and I guess the person I thought might have been a friend clearly wasn't, was like, yo, don't talk to me about your BS. Like, I don't need to hear about what you're talking about. And I was just like, oh, shoot, my bad. Okay. So I was discouraged as opposed to encouraged. And that was not a good experience for me moving forward, because then if I even had the slightest hint that it wasn't something that was worth sharing or was worth telling anybody, I just wouldn't. And so I kind of fell into the victim of just being really bottled up with a lot of things that I would just never get out. I would never be able to talk about them. And then when I would have a weird reaction towards somebody, they might have been completely innocent what happened, and I'm just like freaking out on them slightly. And all of a sudden they're like, yo, it's cool, calm down, everything's fine. I don't know like what's going on. And then I start to realize, oh, okay, this person isn't on that level. He can or she can understand and be willing to be open to hearing what I have to say. Cool. So not everybody's like that first experience. And slowly I started to kind of try to share more, but honestly, not until I probably turned 30 was I really the most comfortable with, or should I say, more acceptable or being able to feel good about being vulnerable and the growth that comes with it, because at all costs, I would just not want to be in that state. I hated that feeling. I didn't want to do whatever I had to do to, I guess, come out of that feeling. I kind of was just like, dang, I'm okay. I'd rather nobody know. I'd rather no one think anything different of me. And I think that goes to show that I was a little bit more or too concerned with kind of what other people thought about me. And, that's a big step for me, because being vulnerable means you do kind of have to let people know what's going on, and you have to be okay with being in that position. So that was where my growth had to start, because it was non-existent. I was probably the worst at sharing. In fact, I would share lies as opposed to the truth. So that way okay, so he's fine. He actually said something to me, when it was the complete opposite of probably how I felt or what I was going through. But it made me feel good enough that they thought it was good enough. So that kind of cycle just repeated in my life for years, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point of like when you choose to be vulnerable, right? And then somebody rejects that, or somebody insults you, or somebody's like, nah, I don't want to hear that. I don't care to hear that. Then it's like, oh, and when you're vulnerable and you get like denied or you get shut down in that moment when you were like either sharing something that's really important to you or something that's really just hard to share, it makes it like I think that makes sense that it just makes it hard to keep doing it, right? It makes it hard to want to keep doing it because then you're like, well, I had this negative reaction before and this totally changed my relationship with this person in a bad way or changed like how they viewed me or how I viewed them. And so now I'm going to be, you know, even more standoffish or I'm going to hold that in a little bit more. And I think that's where kind of like what you said with like being comfortable with yourself too, right? I think you have to be you have to continue to be more and more comfortable with yourself to be vulnerable because you never quite know what the reaction is going to be or how people are going to react and so then you realize like okay, I'm okay with getting like somebody looking at me weird or somebody thinking a little bit less than of me because there's way more people on the other side of that. And I think I really had to learn that with getting clean because within 2 years I was going in classrooms and groups and sharing about my experiences through life, right? Sharing about different things I went through, different things that happened to me, my own thought processes in that, whether I'm talking about, my addiction or I'm talking about unhealthy relationships I was in, or I'm talking about, just my mindset of feeling weak or feeling depressed or feeling less than or feeling like I didn't fit in anywhere. And that's like tough to say, especially to high school or middle school students where they can be brutal sometimes. And so I think right away, like I was just kind of forced into like, all right, a lot of people can take stuff from this and some people are going to laugh in your face. And I've had definitely some pushback in schools and I became more okay with that. I became more okay with the fact that like, I'm going to be vulnerable because it does a lot of good for me. If you can take something from it, awesome. If not, thanks for listening, and we can move on.
I completely kind of understand what you're saying, and I don't think that I could have even done what you did, sharing your experiences so early after having gone through what you went through. Getting clean, the process, the struggle that went with that, knowing that certain people may not respond well, even though you're there to help them maybe learn if they're not going through it to help prevent them from going through it, or if they're already somehow going through it at that young age, that there is a way out that doesn't require you to live that life for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years or whatever the case is. But I know personally you're better than me because I would have had a hard time getting in front of anybody, let alone the younger generation, explaining kind of, hey, this is my story, this is where it started, this is where it went, and this is how it ended, and this is how I got here. I barely can give a speech in front of people that I know I want to talk about. So knowing that, you had the courage to be able to do that so soon after is really inspirational to me personally, and for how I was unable in my ability to really feel good about myself in that situation where I know that I'm talking about experiences that are positive now but were negative or did put me in a negative light. I would have been hard pressed to be able to do that. So I think that takes more courage than I even have today to be able to share experiences like that. Because even to this day, there's stuff that I would just rather be left unsaid that isn't affecting me mentally, but at the same time, I don't really care to share because I don't really appreciate that vulnerability state. So I know for me, I think this topic specifically is one where I can take a lot from and try to grow my life in that aspect of my life because it really isn't a strength for me personally.
Yeah, I think that's just one of those really tough things that we kind of figure out as we go. And because I definitely wasn't always like that. I was, that's why I got into drugs so much, because I wasn't comfortable in front of people. I wasn't comfortable around people, whether it was just one person or 20 people. I had to be high or drunk to kind of remove myself from myself. I had to be somebody else in those moments. And so, like, I think early on, going to NA meetings, every single day for probably the first 2 years, um, really kind of helped with that, just because I was always in an environment where everybody was sharing and talking
Mm.
about struggles and talking about where they're at. And then I would do the same thing. And so it got me comfortable. At least it was kind of a safe spot, right? Like we're all drug addicts sitting in there, so it's a little bit different. But it helped me get comfortable with that idea of, oh, I'm going to talk about it, I'm going to share about it, or like, one of my big moments early on in getting clean, and one of the parents of the kids I was coaching took it to my boss, and that I was a recovering drug addict, and then I had to share in front of 20 parents that I just met, and I'm coaching their 12-year-old sons in the sport, and I'm having to sit there and say, yeah, I used to do heroin, um, and it was a really cool reaction. The parents were like, all right, cool, like we're glad you're doing better. Now let's get back to the field. And it was just like, yeah, I gained it just showed me, like, all right, 1 out of 20 people are going to have a problem with it, and that's okay with me. And so even though it's still hard, I think at times, like, even just when I look back at, November, December of last year, where I really struggled, like, I'm still feeling more comfortable talking about that because it was so recent. I have a lot, I'm pretty comfortable talking about, like, my active addiction and what I felt like it then, because that was that 9 years ago now. But some of the more recent things, like, I kind of feel that same way. Like, I still need that. I need to be more comfortable in doing that, because when I do share those things, like I said, I feel that growth. And I think the other side of it is just like listening too, right? Like, I think we can gain a lot in just listening, reconnecting to you, and listening to some of the things I never realized, that you went through, or your thought process to that, like, just helped me feel more comfortable. Or, listening to other people share their experiences. That's always a really big thing for me, is I really try to intentionally listen when somebody's sharing, because maybe I can't relate at all. Maybe we are just like totally different. But I've met enough different people from different parts of the world or different lifestyles or different, just cultures or, the way they were raised. And yet there's still some relation, right? We can relate even though we grew up totally differently. We're from two different places. I'm sure just our lifestyles in general are different, but we can still go back and relate. And I think that's where some of that courage and vulnerability doesn't always necessarily have to fall on you. But as long as you're taking the time to actually listen to somebody, I think that can be just as helpful.
Yeah, no, I definitely like what you said there. I'm a big fan of actively listening to what people are saying, especially when they're saying it. I'd say I'm probably a better listener and I guess help or guide in that sense than me trying to share that experience to someone and listening. And part of that could be because some people that I've maybe chosen to speak to just don't listen that well or didn't care to pay attention enough to me so that when after I was done talking, it was very obvious that they either didn't really pay attention or they didn't really care. So they're just like, oh, cool. Yeah, I kind of went through that. I'm like, did you though? Because I talked for like 10 minutes and you were just nodding your head and saying everything was fine. So that's where, again, I kind of had a discouraging experience early on where, yeah, I'll listen. I could be the best listener and I will be able to attentive to what you're saying and usually be able to provide some type of insight. If it's from a personal experience or from a knowledge base of mine, cool, I can provide some type of feedback and help. So that's where I always try to focus because, like you said, you do get a lot, you can get a lot out of being a great listener and picking up things that people are saying and whether you've experienced it or not, like you also said, it's whether it's an emotional thing or just the experience itself, being able to relate to other people isn't exclusive to one's culture or one's identity even. It's universal, just like emotions are. We can experience them happy, sad, or indifferent no matter where you were born or, what type of lifestyle you live. So that's where as I try to continue to be a great active listener and learn from that, take the flip side of it is even if the person I'm talking to might not be listening that well or might not really be paying attention, still be okay with what I'm saying and feel good that I'm getting out what I'm trying to say and I'm expressing it. And then maybe I just need to find someone better to listen to that's actually going to want to listen to it. But that's where I've kind of learned that you don't have to have the right person in front of you to be able to share your experience, to be able to share your story, to tell someone how you feel. And that's as I get better at being vulnerable in that moment, you just stop caring really what they think and start more focused on how do I grow or how do I get better. And I think that's going to be my focus specifically in this type of topic because it's by nowhere near perfect and where I want it to be. And I'm excited for this one because I'm going to look back on this topic discussion and probably take even more from it. And that's the most exciting for me. Reconnecting with you too is like, wow, some of the stuff that you can always assume someone went through, like going through addiction and the recovery, but you don't really know until you talk to somebody who went through it and actually understand what they went through. And so that's where I am going to, kind of try to focus a lot of my stuff. And that's where I get excited about stuff that I maybe never even thought about. And this is one thing that I hadn't thought about in a long time. So it's kind of cool to really put this on the light and really shed that light on it because I really haven't in a long time.
Yeah, and I think like even just to what you're saying and having those moments of like, discouragement or those negative feelings of when you share and you're vulnerable and somebody pushes back or you can tell they're not interested or you can tell they don't care. You can tell like there's not much empathy there. Looking at, some of the things that we've talked about over the last 2 months and the vulnerability that, you've shown in that too. I think that already shows growth. And I think that's where like, when you're sitting down just talking to somebody and you're both actually interested in talking and growing together, like that's where that vulnerability can create that growth. It's uncomfortable at times to do that. Like I'm really uncomfortable filming myself. I've never been big in social media, and I don't think I've posted anything on social media for years. And I think my wife even said to me, she's like, how do you go from not posting anything on social media to like filming yourself and doing this stuff? And it's because it really helps me so much. Like just in my recovery and trying to, grow as an individual, as a husband, as a father, as a person, grow for myself, like having these discussions with you, with other people, and then, just seeing how some other people can relate to it has been a really powerful thing for me and that growth. And that's where like being vulnerable and opening up can be one of the scariest things I think you can do. Because, like you said, we don't want to get rejected. We don't want somebody to look at us in a different way. But at the same time, it's also one of the most powerful things you could do. Because you never know who's going to come up to you afterwards, who's going to send you a message, who's going to, for this, leave you a comment and just be like, yo, I felt that. Like, I went through that. And I've seen some of the comments on different things that people, either that I've shared, you've shared, or somebody on one of our journey segments have shared, and somebody just being like spot on. And like, yep, I'm right there with you. And those are really cool things. And I think that's where I really like that vulnerability. I hate it at times, and I hate it sometimes when it's maybe something more recent that I'm still trying to get through myself. Um, but I just see the power in it so much, and I think the more we can do it, the more we can share, the more we can listen, the more we're going to grow in life, right? The more we're going to realize, like, we're going to see less differences, and we're going to be able to say, yo, even though we come from different places, we can relate on this, we can grow in this. And so now we can have an actual conversation together. And I think that's where that vulnerability can be really important instead of always, puffing out our chests and acting like, we're carrying ourselves because we got the best life and we got this and we got that. And yet when we go home, we're dying inside, right? When we can't even look in the mirror at ourselves because we're not happy with what we see or what we're doing. And I've had enough of those moments, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 2 months ago, where I don't want to go through that anymore. I don't want to take away the things that I have to do to stay healthy and end up back in those places. So sharing, being vulnerable is one of those things that gives me the most growth and just overall some of the most good feelings and positive emotions that I get in my day-to-day life.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And while I may not be the best at wanting to share things and being in that vulnerable state, I will say from experience that just like getting anything off your chest, as the expression goes, it feels amazing afterwards. It might have absolutely sucked saying it, going through it, feeling it in the moment, but 99% of the time you feel great afterwards. You're grateful that one, you did have the courage to share, and two, by sharing it, it's now not bottled up inside of you. You're able to really kind of almost release the energy that was associated with it, whether it was positive or negative. And for me, being big on energy and kind of how the universe flows in and out of everybody, that's where it really resonates with me directly because you, communication is everything, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's even with you yourself, being able to look at yourself in the mirror with what you're doing in your day-to-day life, experiences you've went through. When you can communicate effectively and well, when you do start sharing those experiences, that vulnerability doesn't seem so strong. You don't feel so in the dumps or fearful or hesitant to share. And now, when you brought back up, some of the stuff that I've shared, I guess I just was so comfortable with, myself to feel like I could share stuff that where I didn't maybe even feel like it was being that vulnerable, but I maybe was without realizing it. And I think that's a good point that once you start becoming more comfortable with yourself, you can share stuff that you might not have thought you could share. That actually can positively affect how vulnerable you feel the next time you have to share because you've already kind of gotten used to it. You know what that feeling is like. You might resist it up to the point of actually doing it, but just doing it, saying it, starting that conversation, boom, it flows easily. Next thing you know, whether you have someone who can care or not, whether you have someone who's encouraging or not, it doesn't really matter at that point when you start feeling better about yourself. Because when you share experiences and you talk about what's going on, you almost start to not really care what they think if they don't care. And you're just happy that you're not bottling this up and keeping it inside and feeling fearful of the whole experience. So that's where I look back on some of the topics we've had and the conversation we've had, and yeah, I guess yeah, I did put myself in a vulnerable spot. I just didn't really feel vulnerable, and I guess I attribute that to being so much more comfortable with myself now as a person in my mid 30s that I don't really think about life on the level of what does everybody else think of me? What are they going to think of me if I say this? I could care less, to be honest with you. If I'm providing for my family, I'm living, my life happily the way I want to. At the end of the day, really not much can bring me down. And I think that's, while it's a difficult position to get to, learning how to be courageous in those conversations can actually really help you get to a level similar to that.
Yeah, and you definitely shared some vulnerable things. So for the millions and millions of people watching, you shared those vulnerable things, and and I think that I think that's a really good point that you made of just getting to that point in life where you can share or you can feel more comfortable, or definitely I think depends on the relationship and who you're talking to. I felt really comfortable just having these conversations with you, and again, it's always it's kind of funny as we gone through these couple of months doing this and being vulnerable together and putting it out there to be vulnerable in front of more people. Um, we haven't we barely communicated for 14 years with a little bit of here and there, and then we just picked it up and got going again. And so I think that relationship can have a lot to do with it as well. Um, but that's where just the encouragement to be vulnerable is what we want to bring. And if you're not at that point, and I understand that, because like I said, I'm not at that point with certain things, and I certainly wasn't at that point in different stages of my life. Like I was terrified to share something, or I was terrified to say something, and that's what kept me alone for so long, kept me isolated for so long, because I wouldn't be vulnerable. I wouldn't just say like, hey, I have a problem. I hate myself. I hate my life. I hate where I'm at. I hate that I've lost all my relationships, that I dropped out of college 4 times, that I lost my scholarship, that I gave up in those moments. And I just didn't want to say that out loud. I didn't want to be vulnerable and to have somebody just be like, yeah, dude, you really messed up. And now I can say stuff and just feel more comfortable with the response. Like, yeah, somebody can. It's okay if somebody tells me I really messed up, because I did really mess up, and I'm like you just said, I'm comfortable more with myself now to be able to share those things and say those things and be okay with the response, and it just be looking at it as okay, that's your opinion, whether it's good or bad, and that's okay to me. Some responses I'm going to take in a little bit more than others. Um, Same thing with listening. I mean, there's been a couple people, especially like in meetings or just having conversations, where I heard something they said, and I'm like, I almost have that sigh of relief, because it's like, oh man, I thought I was alone in that. I thought I was alone in that feeling or that experience or that emotion, and I'm not. And if that person who's a complete opposite of me can say that they've experienced or felt something similar to what I did, then I'm not as crazy as I think, or I'm not as alone as I convince myself at times. And so that's where I think the just having that courage and vulnerability, um, it's going to be different at different points in our life, but be open to it, right? Be open to those conversations, whether you're listening to somebody or you're the one talking and getting that feeling off your chest, because like you said, it can be it's that it can feel so good, like that weight off your shoulders when you can just say something and get it out there and start moving past it, instead of like holding it in, it building up, it getting worse until eventually it explodes in some negative behavior or some negative experience, because you didn't let it come out. Um, so I think just like as we grow in that, just I would encourage people to be open to it, either side of it, but just be open to listening to others, which I think we struggle with in today's world, is just listening to somebody else and listening to where they come from and their experiences and their emotions and why they feel or think or do the things that they do. And then also just be more open to sharing that, being more vulnerable in letting people know, like, hey, this is where I'm coming from and this is why. These are the emotions and the things I feel behind it. And I think both ways can add a lot, not only to your life, but other people's lives. And, kind of just pushing on, what we're trying to do. It's that radiating part of it, right? The vulnerability is you're sharing your experiences because you got to that point where you're comfortable. You can say, this is how I've grown. This is where I struggled. This is where I succeeded. This is where I failed. And now I'm just going to keep going with it. And I think that can be that powerful part of it, of sharing those experiences, which is like that final part of our channel, of our process, of our project, is then taking that out to other people so other people can hopefully grow and relate and feel better about maybe where they're at mentally at that time.
Yeah, yeah. I love kind of what you were saying there. It resonates a lot once you really get to that point in life where you feel good. But if you're not there, if you don't feel like you've ever been able to share experiences, even with your closest friends or family, let this be I guess the spark that lights it up and just go for it. Just expect that you might not get the feedback or the reciprocal feeling that you're expecting, and that's okay. You got to say it that first time. Yeah, when I was 20, 21, 22, and I shared a story that basically got spat in my face, yo, you're an idiot. Never tell me that again. And they were actually serious. It wasn't a joke. And so for me, yeah, that was a hard no early. But while I didn't want to start sharing immediately right away, I'm now, years later, much more comfortable. While I still need to grow in this aspect specifically, like you had said, I have shared some very vulnerable things that have happened in my life or to, people around me. And that is a big step to take. Once you can take it, or once you can realize that you need to take that step because you are stuck in this ebb and flow of just a little bit one step forward, one step back. Maybe you feel like you could talk about it, but then you realize you maybe don't have the person in your life to share it with, so you don't. Just kind of like Brandon just said, open up, be free, be open to the idea of it being okay to share, to be in that vulnerable state, whether you get the feeling in response, whether you get a good conversation out of it, or whether you just finally break that ceiling and say, I'm going to tell somebody about this. I really don't care who it is, what they say about it. But if you can get to that point, you can start to, at least I think, grow from where you are at to a place where you can get to be where you can radiate in the same way that we are now, sharing your experience and being able to feel good about what you went through, even if it was the most negative or the most difficult to overcome. And that's why it makes a lot of sense when we really try to think about, okay, cool, I want to be able to share my experiences. I want to be able to talk to people about it. I don't know where to start. This is the whole point of our channel. This is the whole point of where we're at here at Illuminate, Navigate, Radio. We want you to feel like you have someone you can go to, even if the first step is for you to leave a 20-sentence comment about it, just so you can get it out, share with us. Let us be that initial first step to help maybe get that out of you. Because I guarantee you, once you share the first time, it's a little bit easier to share the second time and every time after that. And I think most people will agree that the first time is always the worst time. It really doesn't matter what you do in life, but the first time you share something that you don't want to talk about, the first time you do something that you never tried before, it's going to be the worst time you ever did it. You might get lucky and be okay at it. You might maybe have a really good experience, which hopefully facilitates a positive reaction going forward. But even if you don't, doesn't mean stop. Doesn't mean you can't keep going. Doesn't mean you can't push through. And I know that's where I personally have grown the most is I don't care if you don't like what I'm saying, but I care that I'm getting it out. And if you're not going to listen, cool, I'll find someone else that will be able to listen, because I know that if it was reversed, I would be the most actively listening to what you're saying. I could have never went, and I guess the example I'll give is, even though we've been connecting, I've not been addicted to hard drugs. I didn't go through anything crazy like that, but it doesn't mean that I can't, one, relate to your experiences and in a way still empathize with what you went through, because we all have things that we can relate to that, while they might not be apples to apples in terms of the severity maybe of it, doesn't make one or the other any more or less meaningful for what we went through. And I think that's the really big part of this whole project we're trying to launch, is just no matter what it is, what facet of life you come from, where you're at in the world, where you're at in your own life, share. Be okay. Be open. It's going to feel a lot better the more you do it. You'll find the people, you'll connect with the people that care and want to listen to you. And that will in turn help you grow as a person mentally, even physically, just being comfortable in yourself in your own skin. And that's kind of what I love so much about the first, couple of months we've done here, is just being so much more open about things in our life can really lead to a better life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what you just said was so powerful and so good. Like it just being freeing, right? You mentioned being freeing to share that, and whether somebody's going to respond in a certain way, it's still freeing for you to finally say that, and whether that's in a text message, an email, a conversation, a comment. You said leave a 20-cent on comment. There was one comment we got, if you go back and look at it, literally it took me like 5 minutes to read it. And it was just really cool that somebody felt like they could sit there and comment for that long and type for that long. And it was just, it was a cool thing to see. And, you know, those moments of freedom is where we can grow, right? Those moments of sharing and putting that out there are moments we can feel really good. Like you said, whether people are going to listen or not, or take it in or not, that's all right. I remember the first time, besides doing what I was doing for work, there was an actual person that invited me to talk specifically about my story from kind of start to end. And I was so nervous. I was so scared. Even while I was going through it, like I had been talking in front of people about a lot of different things, but it was just that one, it was like, oh, I got to put it all together now and talk about it. And it was really vulnerable because I was going through the different things that I went through and how that escalated and the different feelings and how those escalated. And at the end of it, I just felt so much better. I don't feel like it was the best talk I've ever had with people. I don't feel like I got my words out in the right way at times, but it felt really good to just like sit there and share my whole experience. And whether that was, some people obviously not paying attention or others really engaged, doesn't matter. It did a lot for me in that moment. And so, keep trying to find that courage. Keep, and like you said, what we're trying to do here of bringing just a lot of different stories and a lot of different experiences together, because I think we all can relate. Like the other thing I want to point out that you said that I think is so important, before we kind of wrap up here, is when I've shared with people have said to me, well, oh man, that's crazy. Like I've never been through anything like that. Or like, oh, what you went through is so much worse than what I went through. And I'm like, no, like, yeah, I was a heroin addict and I went through these different experiences internally and externally, but that doesn't mean something that you went through didn't hit you as hard as some of those experiences hit me. And I think that's what's important to remember. It's like, we're not comparing stories, and we're not sitting here saying, oh, my life was worse than yours. It's like, no, we can find different places we can relate in our different experiences. And just because I was a drug addict and maybe somebody else wasn't, that doesn't mean some of those things impacted us just as strongly. And I think that's an important thing to remember when being vulnerable, is like, you don't have to compare your story to somebody else's. It can be the most powerful story in the world, and it can do so much for other people. And it might not sound as crazy or so many like of those different stories or points that other people can elicit, and some of their crazy stories and adventures through life, but it can still have such an impact on somebody when you're just sharing your feelings, your emotions, your thought processes, your behaviors, and getting that out for other people to hear. So that's what we want to continue to do, and have people grow with us, come and do the same with us, because we find a lot of joy in it. We want other people to find joy in it and find hope in it. I think that's one of the biggest things going into this that I wanted to have is bringing hope, because that's what brought me hope early on in my darkest moments, was seeing other people able to get out of those hell moments. Other people pull themselves from rock bottom, or have somebody else pull them up out of rock bottom before they were able to get on their own feet, and just continue that growth. So that's what we want to keep doing, share these different, topic discussions and go into them a little bit more in depth of how we see them, how we relate to them. I thought this one was really good because we were able to talk about how we struggle with them as well, which again, that's what we're doing. We're just having a conversation. It's not saying we are perfect at whatever it is that we're talking about, or we deal with it in 100% the correct ways. So, we want to just keep inviting you in, subscribe so you're not missing anything. And then keep checking us out. Join in at times too. Join in at that any way you want, right?
Absolutely. Whether it's, a comment here and there, whether it's maybe a request for a certain type of topic that we haven't talked about and that we maybe haven't really alluded that we might get into, feel free to give us some suggestions. Maybe there's a specific topic or experience that you went through directly that you just don't really know how to even bring it up other than to say, hey, look, can you guys talk about this? I went through this and I just want to see if I can get some help. That's the biggest thing I think that our mission is, maybe if you want to call it that here, on the channel, is to really get people to feel more comfortable with opening up about things they're going through, because there's a lot of people out there that are going through what you're going through, haven't gone through what you've gone through, or have gone and have been better now. So you have all steps of the process of healing around you, should you just choose to accept it in that way. Be open to the idea that someone who you've never spoken to or seen in your life may provide the most impactful experience in your life at that point. And that's where the more of these we do, the more exciting it is, the more excited I get, because we learn more about each other than we ever knew, which I think is cool. And the world gets to kind of see that as well. But at the same time, it just helps me remember that life is short. We sometimes take that for granted. We don't always have, maybe, and it's not necessarily a right or wrong mindset, but we just don't always have that approach to life where we are really grateful for the moments that we get and the one life that we have to live. So, speak up, share, please be open to it. Feel free to send a direct message to the channel as well. If you're just, really feeling vulnerable and you don't really know how else to break out of it, boom, start there. We will be glad to help the way we know how to. But like Brandon said, we're not perfect in this. We're not experts in exactly what to do, when to do, because no one is, because everyone's different. Everyone's experiences are different. So we don't have all the answers, but we do have experiences that we can share, which can really help be relatable to anybody, male, female, mother, father, son, daughter, whatever role in life you are. We can all share, join a community together, and grow. And that's what I love about this whole channel.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to kind of end right there. I would say go check out our journey segment for Monday. Make sure you come join us on Friday for our start of our April series. And this has been another episode of Illuminate, Navigate, Radiate. Have a great rest of your day.